Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For revision for the brain specimens. The first specimen is the cerebral cortex. The cortex has three poles. This is the frontal pole, and this is the temporal pole, and this is the occipital pole. The cortex has three surfaces. This is the superior lateral surface, or the lateral surface. Here is the superior lateral border, and here is the inferior lateral border. If we look to the superior lateral surface, we can identify two major sulci. This is the central sulcus. And the central sulcus has characteristics. Number one, it is a continuous sulcus, not interrupted. Number two, this sulcus is present on the medial surface of the cerebral cortex. And also it starts just behind the midway between the frontal pole and the occipital pole. So this is the central sulcus. Also there is the lateral sulcus. Its stem lies in the inferior surface of the brain, and it has three rami: the anterior ramus or the horizontal ramus, and the ascending ramus, and this is the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. On this lateral or superior lateral surface, we can find here the preoccipital notch, and also part of the parieto-occipital sulcus. If we do an imaginary line between the terminal part of the parieto-occipital sulcus and the preoccipital notch, so this is the occipital lobe. And this is the central sulcus. So this is the parietal lobe. And in front is the frontal lobe. And this is the lateral sulcus. Inferior to it is the temporal lobe. So we have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Concerning the sulci and the gyri, this is the central sulcus. And in front of it, there is the precentral sulcus. And in between them, the precentral gyrus, which is the motor area, area 4, for the opposite half of the body. And the body is represented here upside down. Here is the head, the trunk, the lower limb, and the perineum lies on the medial side. They are not present on this superior lateral surface. This is the precentral gyrus, motor area. In front of it, I will find two sulci, the superior and the inferior frontal sulci, dividing the frontal area into three gyri: superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, and the inferior frontal gyrus. The most posterior parts of the superior and the middle frontal gyruses, this is the premotor area. The premotor or the extrapyramidal center. So this is the superior frontal gyrus, this is the middle frontal gyrus, and this is the inferior frontal gyrus. The most important thing in the middle frontal gyrus is that in its posterior area there is the visual eye field, for conversions of muscles, conversion reflexes, the visual eye field or the frontal eye field. Frontal eye field. Here is the horizontal part or the anterior part of lateral sulcus, and this is the ascending part of lateral sulcus, and this area is called the Broca's area of speech. This Broca's area of speech is responsible for the motor speech, motor function of the speech. This is the motor area of speech. It is present in the dominant hemisphere. Damage it will lead to motor aphasia. The patient cannot articulate words. The Broca's area of speech, motor area for speech. So this is by far the frontal lobe. The most important thing is the pre-central gyrus, motor area. The most important also is the Broca's area of speech. Rarely we identify the frontal eye field or the extrapyramidal centers, but these are the most important here. The pre-central gyrus is the most important of them, and the Broca's area of speech second to it. This is the central sulcus, continuous sulcus. Behind it, this is the post-central sulcus. And in between them, this is the post-central gyrus, which is the sensory center for the opposite half of the body, the main sensory area for the opposite half of the body, and also the body is represented upside down in it. Lateral to it, this is the parietal lobe. This is intraparietal sulcus, which divides the parietal lobe into superior parietal gyrus and the inferior parietal gyrus. The inferior parietal gyrus is the vernix area. The vernix area, which damage of it will lead to receptive aphasia. The patient can speak, but he cannot speak meaningful words. Vernix area. This is the lateral sulcus. At the end of this lateral sulcus, I will find a gyrus, which is the supra-marginal gyrus. It is a part of the vernix area. And here is the temporal lobe. Here is the superior temporal sulcus, and this is the middle temporal sulcus. If I follow the superior temporal sulcus, at its end, this is the angular gyrus. It is very important in the practical exam to identify the supramarginal and the angular gyri. It's very important. This is the lateral sulcus. If I follow it, at its end, supramarginal gyrus. But the superior temporal sulcus, if I follow it, this is the angular gyrus. It is very common in the practical exam to find it, so you have to identify it carefully. This is the temporal lobe, the superior temporal sulcus, the middle temporal sulcus, and this is the inferior temporal sulcus. We have three: the superior temporal gyrus, the middle temporal gyrus, and the inferior temporal gyrus. The most important is the superior temporal gyrus, because it contains the hearing center at the floor of the lateral sulcus. The hearing center and the hearing association area lies in the superior temporal gyrus. So this is by far the commonest area in this superior lateral. If I revise it, this is the central sulcus. The pre-central gyrus is important. The Broca's area of speech is important, and the post-central gyrus is important, and the vernix area, and this is the supramarginal gyrus, is very important, and this is the angular gyrus, very important, and this is the superior temporal gyrus, important because it is the center of hearing here. Concerning that area, this is the occipital lobe and no more. This is by far the commonest in this superior lateral surface. If we merge to the medial surface of the cerebral cortex, which lies between the superior lateral border, and it lies also between it and the inferior medial border. The commonest and the most important prominent is the corpus callosum, which is very common and frequent in the practical exam. This is the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum has many parts. This is the rostrum, the genu, and the body, and the splenium. The splenium which form the forceps major, and the genu form the forceps minor. It is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. It is a commissural fibers connecting different parts of the brain. Very important, the corpus callosum. Above it, there is a callosal sulcus here, in which the anterior cerebral artery lies. And above it, there is another sulcus, which is the cingulate sulcus. And this is the gyrus cingulate, or the cingulate gyrus. It's an important gyrus because it has an important function in the limbic system. The cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is important gyrus. If you look to the occipital lobe here, we'll find the calcarine sulcus. And this is the parieto-occipital sulcus. The parieto-occipital sulcus divides the calcarine sulcus into two parts, the anterior part of the calcarine sulcus and the posterior limb of the calcarine sulcus. Between this is the cuneus, triangular area here. And by the way, the vision, our center of vision, lies on both sides of the post-calcarine sulcus, and it lies on the inferior wall of the anterior limb of the calcarine sulcus. This is the center of vision here. This is the cuneus. Here is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the posterior limb of the calcarine sulcus, and this is the cuneus. In front of the cuneus, I'll find the precuneus. This area is the precuneus. In front of this area I will find this is the remains of the central sulcus. And at this area, I will find around it, this is the paracentral lobule, which is the motor and sensor area for the lower limb and the perineum. It lies on the medial surface and supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. This is the termination of the central sulcus. And if you look at here, this is the central sulcus. And the area around it, this is the paracentral lobule. It is commonly in the practical exam to present it, together with the cuneus and the precuneus and the paracentral lobule. The rest of this is the medial frontal gyrus. The medial frontal gyrus. The rest of. And this is the calcarine sulcus, the posterior limb. It separates the cuneus from the lingual gyrus. Lingual gyrus, like the tongue. It is also important in the practical exam. Very important in the practical exam. The lingual gyrus. The lingual gyrus. And by the way, the lingual gyrus is continuous here with the parahippocampal gyrus, which is continuous with the uncus. It is the same area, so it can be well presented in the practical exam. Lingual continuation is the parahippocampal gyrus. Sometimes they call the hippocampal gyrus. It's okay. And the uncus. So this is important really to identify the lingual gyrus. And this continuation, the parahippocampal gyrus is commonly in the practical exam, very common in the practical exam. The lingual is also very common in the practical exam. The uncus is very common in the practical exam. Concerning the inferior surface here, I will find the inferior surface is divided into two parts. The anterior part, this is the orbital surface, and this is the tentorial surface. The orbital surface, I will find the groove for the olfactory bulb, and I will find the olfactory bulb, groove for the olfactory bulb, and medial to it is the rectus gyrus. Rectus gyrus. Lateral to it, I will find H-shaped sulcus, which divide the orbital surface into anterior, posterior, medial and lateral orbital gyri. All this area they are not very important in the practical exam, but we just know it. This is the orbital surface. And this is the stem, the main stem of lateral sulcus. And this is the lateral sulcus. This is the main stem. And this is the tentorial surface. I'll confine the tentorial surface, I'll find two sulci. Either this is called the inferior frontal, or they call it the occipitotemporal sulcus. And this is the occipitotemporal lobe. Occipitotemporal lobe is important for face recognition. And this is called lateral sulcus. But this is the occipitotemporal sulcus. Sometimes they call it inferior temporal sulcus. It doesn't matter for us. But this gyrus is the occipitotemporal gyrus. And then I will find this, the hippocampal gyrus is important. You have to identify it well in all specimens. The lingual gyrus and the uncus. So if we revise the most important area here, number one, I will put this is the central sulcus. I have to identify it first of all. Then I will mark it pre-central gyrus, motor area. And this is the Broca's area of speech. This is the post-central gyrus, sensory area. And this is the supramarginal gyrus. And this is the angular gyrus. This is the inferior parietal gyrus and the superior. The inferior parietal gyrus is the vernix area. The vernix area. Here, the superior temporal gyrus, because the center of hearing lies here. And on the medial surface, the corpus callosum, the cingulate gyrus, and the cuneus, the precuneus, the paracentral lobule, the lingual gyrus, the parahippocampal gyrus, and the uncus. This is by far the commonest area in this cerebral hemisphere. شكراً.